It is Friday, October 16th, 2020. I'm just reading my Pedigree of the Phoenix website. I'm not going to say much more, I'm just going to continue reading. I am convinced that the profound religious significance of these two ancient symbols of the sun god is virtually identical, even though they are separated geographically by a distance of around 3,000 miles, much of which consists of a vast and forbidding ocean, and they are separated in time by almost as many years. Both of these symbols clearly derive from the same ultimate source, the total eclipse of the sun, and thus they may be clearly understood to embody and convey the various religious concepts which have arisen out of this awe-inspiring celestial phenomenon. Another Mayan use of the winged sun disk symbol, which clearly reflects the ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian usage of this symbol, is the sun god pectoral ornament that is quite often depicted adorning the chests of various Mayan priests and rulers on numerous stelae and bas-reliefs. Ordinarily, this pectoral adornment is simply a sun disk, often bearing an anthropomorphic sun god face, and usually having a fringed tail. Some examples of the sun god pectoral, however, have wing-like extensions spreading out on either side that give them the appearance which is similar to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian winged sun symbol. I'd say more the Mesopotamian one because the fringed tail is basically the bird tail appearance of the sun's polar plumes. An excellent example of this type of pectoral adornment appears on the elaborate ceremonial vestments of a ruler or priest who is portrayed on stele number 16 at Tikal. A very detailed line drawing of the stela, which was rendered by W.R. Coe, appears on page 93 of Mesoamerican Ancient Cities, aerial views of pre-Columbian ruins in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, by William Ferguson and Arthur Rohn. If one visits the British Museum, one may marvel at the ornate stone reliefs that were taken from the ancient remains of the Assyrian Empire by British archaeologists. One of these reliefs depicts a lion hunting scene in which the Assyrian ruler is mounted on a horse and is spearing a lion. If one looks closely, one will notice an Assyrian version of the winged sun disk portrayed on the clothing of the king. It is placed centrally, directly over the ruler's heart, between the two large rosettes that cover his aureoles. The very deliberate placement of the winged sun disk symbol over the hearts of the rulers of ancient Mesopotamia, as well as their Mesoamerican counterparts, is quite readily explainable by the fact that the human heart was considered to be a macrocosmic reflection of the sun by many ancient peoples. So here we see what we're talking about here. So a rayed sun disk, essentially where the aureoles of the breast would be. And then here we have two figures worshipping a tree of life, I believe, and then the winged sun, fairly simple one here over where the heart would be. The image on the left of the Mayan version is not available, unfortunately. Comte d'Alviela also wrote in The Migration of Symbols that in the New World I hardly know of more than one figure which bears an unquestionable resemblance to the winged globe. This is a human face furnished with small pennated wings and a formidable pair of moustaches, which the two English travellers, Messrs. Pym and Seaman, observed cut in a rock at New Segovia in Central America. Mr. Robert Sewell considers that these moustaches are imitations of Assyrian scrolls or Egyptian urae. But here the resemblance may well be accidental, and the choice of a globe or face provided with wings or feathers with a view to typify the sun is too simple a combination for it not to have been possible to occur independently in the symbolism of nations unknown to one another. This is a very good point, is that these symbols can arise independently as a result of observing total solar eclipses. There is no need for any cultural contact between the different cultures to have pretty much the same symbol, because they both saw similar perceivable symbolism in total solar eclipses, and were inspired by it to make art that's very similar. So they, did have this idea of cultural contact. Basically the Egyptians coming to America to teach the pre-Columbian native people, but there's really little evidence of that, and it's not necessary. Even if there was cultural contact by Egyptians coming to America, the pre-Columbian people could very well have already come up with these symbols on their own, just as a result of viewing solar eclipses. Well, it is very clear to me that there are actually quite a number of motifs in New World religious iconography which bear a considerable, if not unquestionable, resemblance to the Egyptian and Mesopotamian winged globe symbol. Comte d'Alviela's concluding statement that this ancient solar system, that symbol, could occur independently in the symbolism of nations unknown to one another rather than through cultural contact is very well taken. Some of the European and American travelers who came across variants of the winged sun disk symbol in Central and South America attributed their existence to direct cultural contact between the American Indians and the ancient Egyptians or Phoenicians, often doing so in a manner that tended to belittle the American Indians' religion and culture. Basically just didn't need to make that interjection because I already wrote it. When we understand that the winged sun disk symbol was actually inspired by the awesome celestial phenomenon of the total eclipse of the sun, which is observable in every region of the earth at one time or another, a mysterious and even terrifying celestial event which would certainly have had a profound impact on every single civilization several times or more during its span of existence, it is abundantly clear that the Mayan, Aztec, Incan, and other pre-Columbian New World civilizations which established sophisticated solar cults almost certainly developed their versions of the winged sun disk symbol completely independently of the ancient Egyptian, Phoenician, and other old world cultures. Having said this, it would be an error to completely rule out the possibility that there may have been some cultural contact between ancient Phoenicians, seafarers, and their pre-Columbian contemporaries, although this would have predated the development of the Mayan, Aztec, and Inca civilizations by several centuries or even a few millennia. Speaking of the Incas, they were actually quite late. They didn't really get started until the 1400s. There was a variety of pre-Inca Peruvian cultures, the Wari, the Chimu, the Nazcas, the Moxica, also known as the Moche. So the Incas were latecomers, really. They probably evolved out of these previous cultures, but the Incas, in terms of the actual Incas, only got started in the mid 1400s, not long before the Spanish came along and put an end to everything. So I just want to make that point. I'm not always perfect either, and even using the term Indians is debatable these days, but it wasn't so much in the mid-90s, late 90s when I wrote this. Well, this would have been the mid-90s when I wrote it, but put up on the internet later. Robert Sewell's description of the figure which Comte d'Alviela considers to bear an unquestionable resemblance to the winged globe in an article published in volume 18 of the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, 1886, provides an excellent example of the culturally biased approach of such Victorian experts. To show how symbols may be varied by ignorant sculptors, I may point to an instance of the winged globe found near the Limon mine in New Segovia in America, and figured in Pym and Seaman's dottings on the roadside in Panama, Nicaragua, and Mosquito, 1869, page 128. All the elements of the pennate globe are here in its Assyrianized form. The central circular body, in this instance somewhat heart-shaped, the side wings, the lower fan-shaped tail, and the two dangling ends under the wings. But whereas in Assyria the central body is converted into a wheel, the disk of the sun, whence probably the origin of the idea of the Buddhist chakra, and the body of an anthropoid deity the fan-like tails being the skirts of his robes and the dangling ends being the ends of his sash, here in America the sculptor has ignorantly dealt with the symbol in just the way that a child would. He has converted the central body into the face with roughly cut nose, mouth, and eyes, and feeling himself bound in some way to account for the ends that so often formed part of the original emblem, he has made them into two long mustaches, depending from the upper lip of the rude face carved on the slab. So rather condescending attitude there. Let's see. The above remarks will serve to show how the sacred emblems of Egypt have spread into other countries and become altered and conventionalized in the process. So again, this is clearly an example of a European believing that these symbols were, brought to America, and then, in his opinion, simplified and degraded, which I don't believe is the case. So let's keep going. While Sewell's argument clearly point out the distinct similarity of this New World variant of the winged globe symbol to the older Assyrian version, they do so at a very considerable expense to the pre-Columbian Native American artists that originally sculpted it. The American Indian sculptor is considered to be ignorant and childish because he depicts the anthropomorphic winged sun disk with a face and mustache. How is this any more ignorant or childish than the works of the ancient Assyrian artists who commonly depicted their ring with wings symbol with a human figure blended into the ring, as Mr. Sewell quite ironically points out, or more childish than the innumerable examples of Old World and Christian religious art, which clearly depicts both the sun and moon with human faces contained within their discs, not the least of these being Albrecht Dürer's famous woodcut illustration of the apocalypse, is difficult to grasp. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like we have it. So we have the cat-like winged globe missing, and then we have the European similar symbol missing. The original description of this sculpture by Bedford Pym and Berthold Seaman also suggests that this symbol was copied from the Egyptian or Mesopotamian prototype. A most finished piece of sculpture I found near the Limon mine in New Segovia. It was a large font broken in halves, having on the outside a human face representing the sun, the hair doing duty for the rays, as shown in the rough cut below. But what struck me as singular was the circumstance that there was a long pair of mustaches, such as no Indian ever had, and the question at once suggested itself, did fancy induce the Indian artist to add this long appendage, or did he copy it directly or indirectly from a bearded race which his countrymen had come in contact? What Bedford Pym, Berthold Seaman, and Robert Sewell failed to realize, or dare I say, were blissfully ignorant of, besides the fact that this symbol was inspired by the total solar eclipse, and thus could very well have been developed without any contact with another supposedly superior civilization, was that many of the ancient cultures of Central and South America associated a feline god with the total eclipse of the sun. The long pair of mustaches, such as no Indian ever had, that is clearly depicted on the face of this anthropomorphic sun disk, may very well represent the whiskers of this feline eclipse god, and the face, rather than being human as was supposed by Pym, Seaman, and Sewell, may very well be that of a cat, specifically the cosmic jaguar or puma, which many ancient American cultures believed devoured the sun during a solar eclipse. An important detail of this sculpture that is not mentioned in any of these descriptions, but which is clearly visible in the line drawing of the sun disk, is that the face sports what appears to be a crew-style haircut, which could possibly represent the upper or north polar rays or so-called plumes of the sun's corona. If this is in fact the case, besides reinforcing the argument that this pre-Columbian American example of the winged disk symbol was in fact inspired by observations of the total solar eclipse, it would be one of the relatively few winged disk symbols which clearly depicts the coronal plumes and rays of both the north and south poles of the sun. The first page of the Mayan Codex Fergervari-Meyer represents the 5 regions of the world and their respective tutelary deities within the framework of a large Maltese cross. Bisecting the angles between the 4 arms of this cross are 4 loops, and over the end of each loop hovers a bird. These birds have well-defined heads with normal-sized eyes and beaks. However, their bodies are perfectly circular discs with an outer ring of white surrounding an inner ring of a darker shade. Their similarity to the Mesopotamian ring with wing symbol and some Egyptian versions of the wing disc, in which the red sun disk forms the body of a falcon, is immediately apparent. Unfortunately, it's not apparent on the page here. Let's just see the time. I don't want to make sure we're 4 minutes, still got some time. So unfortunately, the images are not available. Similarly, in Feathered Serpents and Flowering Trees, reconstructing the murals of Teotihuacan, we find depictions of quetzalbirds which bear sun disk shields on the front of their bodies. The wings of these quetzalbirds, which are considered by archaeologists to be mythological anthropomorphic beings, appear to be attached directly to the solar disks. If the head, tail, and legs of these birds are deleted, a winged sun disk symbol that is eminently comparable to the ancient Egyptian, Hittite, and Assyrian examples of this ubiquitous religious symbol is what remains. So since we have to go to another page, I'm going to wrap this up here, even though there is still some time left on the record. Yeah, there were a couple of things I wanted to say, but I think I'll leave it. Although there is one earlier when I was narrating this, if I'm not mistaken, somebody spoke about how this solar eclipse symbolism essentially contributed to advancing human culture, and I agree 100%. The total solar eclipse and the symbolism perceived in it really did have a very strong impact on not just art but science, because they started to try to predict eclipses. They started to track the path of the sun and the moon to try and, once they understood that it was the moon passing in front of the sun, they tried to predict upcoming solar eclipses. And so in a way, the total solar eclipse, it plays a role that's comparable to the black monolith in 2001 A Space Odyssey. It's this thing in outer space or from outer space that basically, how can I put it? It jolts the intelligence of human beings. It causes them to go from a primitive state to a much more sophisticated and knowledgeable state as a result of the symbolism that's perceivable, and then trying through quite scientific methods to predict eclipses, measuring the paths of the sun and the moon, and trying to calculate when they would occur again, and so on. So I just thought I'd mention that.